I thought I was going to pick up an old, rusty refrigerator. That was the plan. But 20 minutes after I arrived, I realized I had accidentally purchased the key to a 30-year-old mystery. And what I found buried under the floor of this abandoned cafe, honestly, still gives me chills to this day. It all started with a random listing on a local website. The title was simple. Free to clear out an old cafe, take whatever you want. The photos were terrible, but I spotted an old metal table in the corner that I wanted for my workshop. I messaged the owner, got the address, and drove there expecting a quick pickup. When I arrived, a man in his 60s was waiting for me. He looked tired. He handed me the keys and said, "The table is in the back room, but honestly, son, if you take all this stuff off my hands, it's yours. I just want to forget this building ever existed." I laughed. I thought he was joking. But he just handed me the paperwork and walked away. Just like that, I became the owner of a dirty, half-ruined time capsule. The ground floor was depressing. Rotten wood, peeling paint, tons of trash. But I am a curious person, so I decided to check the basement. It was dark, damp, and smelled of wet paper. I started sorting through the junk, looking for anything valuable, when my flashlight beam caught a strange object in the corner. It was an old leather suitcase, wrapped in duct tape. The tape had yellowed and become brittle, as if it had been put on back in the late 90s. I had to use a knife to cut it open. Inside, there was no clothes and no money. Instead, the suitcase was stuffed with handwritten letters and black and white photographs. The letters were addressed to a woman named Elena. The photos were of her. She was stunning, about 20 years old, always smiling. But one photo caught my eye. It was a group shot taken in front of this very cafe. On the back was a caption. "The last day before everything changed." I immediately pulled out my phone and started searching for the names from the letters online. That was when I came across an old local newspaper article from 1998. The headline read, "Local woman goes missing. Police have no leads." That was the moment I realized this was not just garbage. I decided to turn this dirty old cafe into a project. Since it was now mine, I was going to make it beautiful again. I started cleaning. And while I was scrubbing years of grime off the tiles, I simultaneously began my own investigation. I went to the library, flipped through old directories, and found the address of the house where Elena used to live. I drove there the next morning. An elderly woman, about 80 years old, opened the door. I showed her the photo of Elena from the suitcase. The woman burst into tears. She told me that Elena was her younger sister. She said Elena had run away from an unhappy marriage to start a new life, but one day, she simply vanished. Her sister said, the police thought she ran off with a lover. But I knew my sister. She would never have left without saying goodbye. I returned to the cafe with a new purpose. I was no longer just renovating, I was searching for the truth. I washed the walls, painted them, and restored the old wooden counter. But the biggest shock was yet to come. I decided to completely tear off the old wallpaper because it reeked of mildew. I was in the back storage room, stripping a thick layer of faded paper, when I noticed the plaster underneath looked odd. I started scraping harder. And then I saw it. Scratched deep into the concrete wall in uneven, rough letters was a message. It read, "He is under the floor." My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I looked down at the wooden floorboards beneath my feet. I grabbed a crowbar, my hands shaking. I pried up the first board. Nothing. The second board. Nothing. But the third board lay too loosely. I lifted it and saw a small, rusty metal box hidden underneath. Inside the box lay a cheap wedding ring, a one-way train ticket to a city 600 kilometers away, and a birth certificate for a little girl, dated 1996. The mother's name was listed as Elena. The father's column was left blank. And that was when it hit me. She did not die. She was not kidnapped. She escaped. She staged her own disappearance to protect herself and her child from an abusive husband. She left this cafe in the middle of the night, got on that train, and started an entirely new life. The inscription "He is under the floor" was not a murder clue. It was her message to the world that she was leaving the past buried so she could finally move on. I spent the next 3 days searching. Using the name from the birth certificate, I tracked down that little girl. She was now a grown woman and lived exactly in the city the train ticket was headed to. I found her on social media and sent her a message, attaching photos of her mother and a copy of the birth certificate. I explained what I had found in the abandoned cafe. She replied within an hour. She was in shock. She told me her mother, Elena, had passed away peacefully 2 years ago. She had never spoken about her past, not once. The daughter had never known about the cafe, the husband, or the escape. She simply thought her mother was from a different city. The daughter drove to see me the next day. I handed her the suitcase, the letters, and the wedding ring. She sat there, holding her mother's belongings, in the very cafe from which her mother had fled 30 years ago. She told me, "My mother always taught me not to keep secrets. But she kept the biggest one of all to protect me." That was 6 months ago. Today, this cafe is finally open. It is no longer just a renovation. It is a monument to second chances. I thought I was just picking up a cheap refrigerator, but instead, I uncovered a story of incredible courage. Sometimes, what we see on the surface is only a cover for someone's painful sacrifice. If Elena had never hidden that suitcase, I would not be sitting here right now. And I would never have learned that the most valuable things in life are not the things we buy, but the stories we are lucky enough to find. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe, because next week there are 3 more abandoned buildings waiting for me. And believe me, this was just the beginning.